Get this stream up and running. We're coming straight in hot. About a minute and a half late. We'll let some people get in here. And why we do this and get set up. All of these are made available online after. So if you're catching this after the stream, it's all good. You guys are probably catching this on X or YouTube. Eventually we'll put these on some of the other platforms too. Get that down there kind of tight. Just moving this thing around a little bit. Let's get some folks in here. And we're going to peel back what it takes to build a Bitcoin mine coming into this next year. And some of the stuff from an administrative standpoint that I'm looking at of what's going to be impacted, what's our custodial risk on our overarching risk with new administration coming in. Are there going to be new rules? Those kind of things. What are we going to be looking at? So we're going to peel that back today and break down some cost, some of the core elements, those sorts of things. So let's see if we can get an array of people in here, because I definitely want to have a conversation with you guys too. Make sure we can have a direct interaction here. I'm going to go out and make sure all the stuff's working. I like to see at least one person that can jump into here and chat and make sure everybody can see us and hear us. And you guys say that you can. And then we'll get into this, my dudes. All right, my dudes. Let's see if we are to go. See any viewers yet? Oh, we got a couple of viewers in here now. All right, my dudes. Again, if you can't stay for the whole stream, it's going to be okay. It will be uploaded straight to YouTube and X for you guys can watch. And we'll get into some shorter content that get to the core specifics. But we're going to break down essentially the core elements of getting into a Bitcoin mine and going into 2025, and just the amount of emails and direct messages that we're getting on X, because, you know, $100,000 Bitcoin. Somebody can go back to about a month ago on our live streams of where the forecast that I thought we would be at in Bitcoin, and we are almost there. I said 105 by the end of the year. At the beginning of January of this year, I had a Bitcoin model from a base case, and we had it set to end the year at 105. We had a downside case showing around 55, and we had an upside case to end the year at 135,000. So right now it's trending on the mid case, which is good. And then what's that mean for participation in, you know, mining in general? I'm going to pull up some tools. We may switch over to the screen to let you guys kind of see, let's say Bitcoin mining hash rate, just to kind of see where we're at. From a hash rate total, it looks like about 700-ish, 711 exahash online right now. There's a couple tools out there that you can try to track of like what's the difficulty going to change. That's a key aspect if you're building in any kind of measurement of like where your forecast is going to go. And what the net change is going to be. Last Monday at 9:25 a.m., there was a Bitcoin difficulty adjustment. It was 1.5%. So that means it just the problem sets that the ASICs are running on takes, you know, about another 1.5% of effort. And then right now we're on target for December 16th. So it's the 6th. So about 10 days from now of having a Bitcoin difficulty adjustment, moving to about between 1.5% to 2.9% right now is the range, probably somewhere in the middle. So another, you know, 1.5%, which is pretty indicative of any kind of efforts that are going on right now from people swapping out hardware. And that's exactly what we're doing. If you guys are following us on X, we're in the middle of switching out a site right now. BBT Gabriel's there right now, actually plugging stuff in, and we'll have about 50 petahash online once that's done for that site. And that site previously was running around 25. So at its peak. So, and then most recently around 13, 14 petahash. So that for ourselves here is, increasing that one site almost double. And that's really what's happening out there as people are taking out some of the older SJ19 or SJ Pro 19s, S19J Pros, Jesus. The 104s, the 100s, the 95 terahash units that have been running for the last 24 months. Same thing with like the M30Ss from WhatsMiner, the 1246 Avalons. A lot of that hardware is coming offline, and then that power is being used to power up some of the newer stuff, and seeing a pretty good proliferation of other types of miners such as Caspa, the Litecoin, Dogecoin, those kind of miners really kind of entering in some of that power space. And this is one of the kind of concepts I want to make sure when you the folks understand is like when you're planning out any kind of build that's outside of your house, it's a 200 amp service, and maybe even have like a warehouse or something that has maybe 400 amps in it. The difference from going from that to like a 3-phase is a pretty significant jump. You get into different cost elements that are on normal bills, like such as demand charge. Essentially, the power company has to calculate, the infrastructure allocation of power to you, and then what is going to be your demand, and they got to level it out because they're going to give you a lower price of that power, but then they got to make sure that if 1 month you're using and they're delivering, let's say 5 megawatts to you, the next month maybe you're only taking 3.5. Well, now they've allocated infrastructure and demand potential to you of 5 megawatts. So if you peak in the middle of the month, they're going to charge you for that whole 5 meg, even if you're not using all of it. So you just got to watch that on some of your power contracts. It's a pretty critical, need to know if you're planning out what your costs are going to be. And that's probably one of the number one things that whenever somebody calls us or they do a consulting with us, one of the very first questions we ask is where you want to do this at. And then in that particular area, what is your power rates? And then what is the structure of that 3-phase service? Is it demand driven? Is it, is there a time periods that you can turn off where it's like time of use is what they call that. So it's just really understanding those kind of power situations and then seeing, is there any gotchas in those contracts? So that's one of the very first steps. Like if you're going to you're looking into building a mine in 2025, you want to look at, your current local area or a target area where you can get some property at, or if you can use their substations, and then look at that power rate. What is that power rate going to do to you? And then put that into a model. And a shameless plug of a model that we're going to be putting out on BitsBeTrippin.io. We're going to have that model available for you guys to pick up, and that allows you to put those variables in, and it automatically connects to APIs, pulls down and updates itself. But it allows you to forecast and plan, what, depending what kind of machines you're going to put in there, how much terahash, you're going to end up putting in there, or petahash eventually. And then what's the cost per petahash? And if you guys saw our video yesterday where we were walking through, a company like Luxor that has a shop and shows on their store kind of like the price per terahash for each unit, you can kind of get a gauge of like what's your total investment of, the total investment in the machines themselves, and then what's going to be your rate of return to at least cover your cost, because you're using fiat dollars or some of your previously mined proceeds to build out, what's your rate of return to get back and to be able to stack some sats, and what's your hodl rates and all that kind of stuff. So that all inputs into those models to figure out, like from a pro forma over a period of time, what's your rate of return, and things like that take into effect, the Bitcoin difficulty in that stuff. But some of the feedback I've gotten on some of these live streams is sometimes I go pretty fast and I talk about things that aren't really fully explained. So, I want to make sure that people understand, that are kind of the outside looking into this space about maybe getting in, that you have the right and relevant information to make decisions on. And so we're trying to really work through the articulation of that, of like how to help as many people as we can get into this space, and, you know, become a participant, because the strength of everybody in this space, you know, that supports the basic narrative of like what Bitcoin is, like a decentralized open participation, and really all proof of work networks that allow you to have fair market participation. And the more people that are doing that, the better, you know, because it shows a strength of network. So I'm going to get to where I can see actually a live chat here. I can see you guys now. I couldn't see the live chat that I'm connected to right now is not showing. So now I'm able to see some of the stuff there. So Techman TV asked, are you guys selling the replaced units or reallocating them? So they'll eventually probably get resold. Some of them will be used for parts because some of the same type of machines are deployed. But we will go through and do a full, you know, check out on essentially create hash reports, find out if there's any parts that we can buy and replace some of them. And then some will get ultimately relisted or sold. We'll probably work through a broker for those type of things. So companies like ASIC Jungle, Luxor, there's a handful of different companies out there that will do broker work for you. And, you know, they will, you know, obviously they get part of a fee for doing that, but then they're handling the essentially you're just finding out when you need to have something ready for pickup. They handle that kind of work there. So, you know, your forecast, if you're looking to expand in there, though, it really needs to be around, is the area that you're in able to compete with the rest of the world when it comes to pricing for power? And we have been working pretty heavily working with other power companies. We're right now actively looking in northern New Hampshire right now to see if there's some opportunity around some local co-ops up there. Same thing in Pennsylvania. I know several of you guys out there that watch the channel are in Pennsylvania. So looking at finding local co-ops that have abundance of power and are looking to make, you know, power structure deals when it comes to like high load factor rates for like Bitcoin miners. So I think most of the power companies out there now have an awareness of what Bitcoin is, and then how big of, you know, what kind of impact or what kind of, you know, response for the Bitcoin miner being part of their network. What's the effect for them and the net outcome for them to include Bitcoin mining in their particular network? So most of the industries out there now that are power producers understand what Bitcoin does now. In the last, I would say 6 months of various companies we've talked to, they're fully aware. They understand. They've been to probably one or two conferences where somebody from, you know, representing either a Bitcoin miner or somebody that's like a power broker that understands the Bitcoin ecosystem has communicated to them. So now we're through a lot of that phase, and I would say maturity of the power industry of understanding Bitcoin and what it is and what its load factors are, and everybody by and large feeling pretty comfortable with the space. So that gives you one step now kind of checked off of any kind of interaction that you're doing with, you know, your vendors or your, you know, potential people that you're looking at property for a particular area. The people that are not really caught up still are the local municipalities, maybe local governments, city councils, that sort of thing, that don't really understand Bitcoin and what the benefits to a particular area it is. You know, all they see is the kind of negative when it comes to like noise, and how to, you know, how certain communities in the ecosystem have had to, you know, it was all in, try to build something, didn't really think about the area that it was in, and now it's creating like a noise pollution kind of issue. Depending what states you're in, there's already a lot of guidance on noise pollution in like Illinois where we're at. I think there's one called like Title 15 subsection H, which is for noise pollution. There's a lot of already guidance on this, right? So it's like looking at wherever your particular area is, and is there a chapter and a subsection that talks to noise pollution? What is it? And just model your design around whatever adheres to addressing that. And then what are the mitigation strategies for that? So when we start talking about mining and trying to, you know, maybe put a container out there, there are a lot of different considerations you have to put into your analysis of like, does this area work? And it really comes down to proximity to a resident and location. What we have found in our sound studies that we've had to do at other sites is essentially after you get about 1,300 feet away from a site, even if it's an outdoor site, and I'm going to use as a reference 4 containers fully loaded out, about 1,400 machines operating at full scale in the highest of times, where they will be using max fan speed, 6,000 RPMs per fans, and maybe let's say you have some assisted fans, you're at about less than 50 decibels after about 1,300 feet. So we had a sound survey done. It was over a period of a week. It had both low cloud cover, nighttime. It was relatively near a highway, about 2,000 feet away from a highway. So it was kind of loud during the day. You could hear the highway noise over the farm after you're at about 100 feet away. But in the evening where there's less traffic, there's less movement in nature, it's maybe colder. You may have low cloud cover, which does affect the way acoustics work. The peak time of that was 2 a.m. in the middle of the night. Like you could hear it at a longer distance. But there's mitigation strategies. So most places that you go into, if you're looking for a substation, you're looking at somewhere that you want to put, a thing at, understand in those first 100 to 150 feet, you're not going to want a direct neighbor to an outdoor container. Like eventually it's going to get on somebody's nerves and you're going to have some pressure. You might have some pressure from a city or a county that you're going to have to address and create some kind of either sound barrier, lattice fencing, something with slats or something to it does help, but it's not the best. Green space, green cover, berms, all those things work way better on addressing the sound. But you got to understand that it's you got your architectural, you got your structural requirements for wherever you're going, and then within that you have your sound. You have any kind of if you're going to use immersion or hydro, you have your considerations when it comes to meeting those local regulations for those type of things too. We've found the best success in rural areas, not next to obviously people, that are usually special use permits on ag land. Because agricultural land, you have very large swaths of land that is not near really anything. And it seems to be the best situation. And there's a ton of substations out in the middle of farm fields. So you have a lot of transmission, you have high voltage out there, and then finding where you can do special use permits. And typically our special use permits, just to give you guys an understanding, is doing stuff like fintech. You can have, there are various classification guides and it depends what county and where you're at in the country. And most of this I'm talking around the US. There's different, and I'll get into international stuff because we've done some support from an international standpoint, but the, local, state, municipality type of things, it all comes back down to like what's that special use. And most of the ones that we register are around, fintech support, fintech architecture. I tend to stay away from the designation of data center, where I know some other folks treat it as a data center, or at least if they're talking about rezoning something. If you have intentions to use that power at some point for a data center application, kind of like what Hut 8 has done with some of their AI compute that they had, their NVIDIA GPUs that were mining Ethereum, when they pivoted those NVIDIA GPUs to start providing LLM and other artificial intelligence, if it's computational fluid dynamics, if it's any of these kind of high compute HPC, high performance computing type of applications, then it makes sense to have that designation. But I'd almost go for a rezoning after that, because data centers usually typically come with a lot more stringent requirements when you start talking putting in a data center. So just using like a special use permit on those lands are usually the better way to go. So again, this is just kind of me sharing some best practice, my dudes, on that. That typically gets you kind of through that. So bottom line is the opportunities are there. It's really centers around finding a power company that will work with you and will establish a competitive rate. That competitive rate is energy costs around that 3 cent range. And when you're all in costs, you're talking distribution, transmission, all that, you're really trying to aim for that 4 or 5 cent all in. That's kind of the target. You can make it work with more, especially right now, but in those times that Bitcoin pulls back or you have some sort of impact in the industry, you got the basic idea is you got to operate, my dudes. You want to be the last to turn off. So, and you're competing against the whole world that is subsidizing some of that power cost. The interesting thing is they can't subsidize all of it, right? You can have certain groups that may get cost advantage over a period of time. Maybe it's a economic rider, as an example, where the municipalities will, maybe it's local or state, will provide an incentive to build there, use local people to help you construct it. And then you may get a 1 to 2 year, 20% off of your tax side of your cost. And as an understanding, to give you guys a perspective of cost, like if I have a 5 megawatt site at 4.1 cents all in with curtailments and stuff, I'm probably around $133,000 a month in a power cost bill. I'm cost avoiding essentially $40,000 to $50,000 with doing curtailments. That's the cost avoidance for capital. So instead of costing $185,000, it's costing $138,000 to $133,000, somewhere around there. If we miss curtailments, we're paying the $180,000, which brings a base rate from 4.1 cents to about 5.2 cents all in, to give you an idea. The cost of energy on that particular deal is 3 cents. So it's 3 cents, 3 for the energy cost. And the rest of that makes up that 4.1/5.2, depending on curtailments, is that distribution, demand charge, CP, which is coincidental peak, and NCP, which is non-coincidental peak rates. So those are the kind of blended costs that kind of fill in your bill. In our area, it's pretty lean on the amount of charges that hit the bill. And like our North Carolina situation with Duke, there was probably 30 items on that bill, right? There was economic riders that were minusing cost, and then there was economic riders that were like, I won't call it detriments, but they were maybe R&D costs or something. They were trying to recapture some project cost on it, and they just earmarked that on the bill. And so you had this massive bill with lots of different charges. And kind of like when you're buying a plane ticket or something, you have all these other like charges that get added on. It's like, oh, that airfare is only $200, and then somehow it comes to like $315 at the end, because it's like, oh, there's $20 here, $40 here. So it really depends on the area, and that's why I said, really look with who you're working with from a power company standpoint, and if you can, stick to smaller co-ops, somebody that's going to work with you, somebody you can get a belly button on to help you get through it. Because some of the larger entities, while I've had really good support from like our Duke person, like we really enjoy and have good conversations with the individual. Unfortunately, they can't really move a needle. They can't, they're doing a role in a job in a major corporation, and it's super hard to get to anybody that's a decision maker. So, those smaller entities, anybody that's producing their own power. So if you're trying to look for sites, you want to find a site that is being produced, that is creating their own power. Like as an instance, we have a local town here that has a dam on it. So it's a pretty decent size tributary off of a major river. And they have a dam that and a large pond that makes up a pretty good swath of property, 20 plus acre pond. And it's got a pretty small dam on it. Well, that dam roughly produces about 8.5 megawatts of power, and that provides it to the local city. But they have a lot of extra. It's essentially a three spot dam with 3 separate generators, so they can have like one running, and then sometimes they'll have them all running and then selling it back to the grid if like we have heavy rains and they need a relief that reservoir, as it were. Working with companies that have infrastructure like that set up to where you can be more of their demand locally and always 24/7, 365 have that on operations. It's really working with their business development people, finding and say, hey, I know they're a net producer. They create energy. Can I work with them to put some containers maybe on one of their sites, use it as a lease, that sort of deal. And going in, you're going to need a handful of things. You're going to need a letter of intent that states some kind of financials that shows that you can actually, you have the backing, you have the capital to do it, and that you're willing to lock that up and commit to it. A lot of those companies will require you to have some sort of deposit. Our local company here takes 2 months now. It used to take 1 month. It takes 2 months of deposit. So like on a 5 meg site, they're going to ask for close to $300,000 in cash or a bond that is set up to handle any kind of instance if you're going to back out. They want like 2 full months of power. So I've seen some places want near, 6 months, which I mean, most of those just don't get people to do it because there's just nobody's going to lock that much capital up. But 2 months is probably the upper tier of what I would see and expect at least a month of your power. Like you got to go in to understand, like if you're going to spend on, let's say a 1.5 meg build, you may spend $750,000 to build that thing out, but then you're going to need, another close to 50 grand in cash to pay for your deposit and then be ready to load out your machines, all that kind of stuff. So understanding the capital that's required and not be shell shocked by that is really pivotal. Like I've worked with several groups that are just like, I just didn't pay attention to what this was really going to cost. So really articulating and understanding that. I mean, use this video as an example. If you're working with somebody, that is a big piece. Like give them this video, just say, hey, coming from Carter, we built several of multiple sites, went through this many times. This is just what it is. These various costs that come in, you got to be ready and anticipated for it. And a lot of that stuff is reapplied. It's not like that money's gone. They'll put it usually in a bond. You're earning interest on it. And some, depending on who the company is, sometimes that bill, like our place as an example, after 1 year, their 11th month, they'll take one of those 2 months and apply it to your 11th month, your 13-month bill. So it'll go 1 full year plus 1 month. That month's bill will be applied with some of your deposit. So you can plan in your pro forma that, hey, month 13, provided we're still cooking, that month's being covered by part of our deposit. And then they'll hold the remaining last month into perpetuity until that deal is done. But most of those lease things are usually 12 months. Some of them can go as far as 3 years if you're trying to lock in your power pricing. So just trying to set expectations for people that are looking into doing a build like that. Really understanding the difference between, 3-phase and single phase and what the functionality is. Most of the miners these days, I would say a good majority of them now support up to 277 power, which is usually 480, slash 277. So previously, years back, you had to go with 415 to get to 240 on your single phase side for your miners. And then a handful of newer miners are all 3-phase. So they've went down on the amperage and just a lot of the immersion water cool stuff is moving to just full 3-phase. So you don't even have to do the step down. Essentially, you're taking in the 480 or 415 direct 3-phase, and you're pumping them right into the miners. So you're not even stepping down onto single phase. Less heat with that. You're pulling less amps because you're at a higher voltage, and it just takes some rework if you're going to have like a 3-phase distribution panel, versus like a 3-phase PDU kind of setup, right? So different type of infrastructure, but understanding, we've had a person reach out recently that, had bought some miners. They showed up and they were 3-phase, and it's just understanding what you're buying, right? A lot of the older containers that are out there for sale, some of those can be retrofitted for 480. They don't need to be 415, but you have to have somebody that's qualified and understands the NAC, which is, the power rules, essentially, the guidance on how to appropriately step down the things that need to be stepped down, and then just provide the 277 to the machines themselves. So like as an example, one of the more recent builds we've done, we took 2 N5V2 Bitmain containers. Those are rated at 415 240. However, you can make an adjustment to those. The bottom line, the primary breaker, the cabinet, the wiring, all of that is sufficient for 480. It's just the step downs are required for certain things like lighting and some of the network switches. You can run some switches like that N5V2 we're running on 277. The network switches are running fine on that, but the lighting, the sensors, the network equipment, like the Ubiquity stack that we're using, all are using a smaller transformer. We have a 7,000 VA, essentially 7,000 watt step down that takes the 480 to 415, steps that down to 240, 120. And so there's just some integrative work there. But again, that's working with an electrician that can understand on what breakers need to be switched out on some of the sub panel, and then make sure that those are compliant for 480. And then that step down, it can be, intercepting part of that power and then provide the ancillary systems for the container. And then you're good to go. It runs fine on 277 power. And again, you have a little more overhead potential to run some of those machines. So most of the newer machines are newer architecture, so they're not in the 4,000 and 5,000 watt range. Even with overclocking, they're more at the most upper bound at 4,000 watts if you're overclocking them, and most of them run 2,700 to 3,000 watts anyways. So you're actually stepping that down. But when you're doing your integration with your power company, they're hooking it up to the transformer, and you're doing your metering to make sure that the container is hooked up appropriately, you need to ensure that don't let them overcook the voltages, because we've seen in a few where they hook it up, it's 480, the phasing looks good, but the actual voltages are a little high. So they might be 289, 292 volts. Have them step that transformer down. There are levels that they can do on the secondary side of most transformers that will level that and bring it down to as low as it can go. So some of our transformers are running at 272, 275, somewhere around there, where you're just bringing your voltages down. Just because these units will support 277, I do not want to run them at 292 volts, right? It's just over time, it's going to tear up the transformer, or it's going to tear up the power supply on that unit. And we did see we were going through some power supplies pretty precipitously when we were running 292. So once we got it down to 270s, everything was running great with the Bitmain units that we had in there, and they've ran for 26 plus months. We're up to 28 months now on them. 104 S19J Pros as an example. So it is that 277 compliant. So if you are talking to your power company, they only supply you 480, you can still make that work. So these are all like really critical pieces to understand if you're trying to do a build. It sounds like a lot. It is kind of a lot, but the basic premises are pretty straightforward. It's the location, the power cost, your zoning, your rules, how your permitting will work, what is going to be required on site, how are you going to handle sound, how are you going to handle any kind of security issues, security of the site, are you going to handle monitoring, who's going to be there, your local belly button, like if you need to have something reset or restarted. All these things you have to take into consideration. And a few of the other live streams I've shown you guys kind of the IMS, the Integrated Master Schedule, to get there. We have a lot of that. Again, shameless plug for BitsBeTrippin.io. You guys can go out there. You can always reach out for consulting support. But that is things that you have to consider when you're doing a build like that. I'm going to take some questions here, kind of give you guys kind of the pre-setup run up there. And then we'll kind of wrap today's up. We're going to do, I think next week, just a straight AMA. And I'm going to be advertising it pretty heavily next week to get people to do some questions. I would like to have a very interactive session next week, to where we have maybe some pre-solicited questions on some of the threads that I put out there on X. And then I will go through and try to answer some of your guys' stuff. So it's kind of like a free quote unquote consulting support right there live. I'll bring up any kind of material I can on screen for you guys to help support some of those questions, but get some of your guys' stuff answered from, folks that are actually implementing every day to help you guys maybe answer some very basic questions. And it could be all kinds of different things, converting firmwares, settings, configuration, any of those kind of things to see what's going on there. So let's see if we got some questions here. Patrick Murphy says he's been researching spots here in Massachusetts. There's quite a few small scale hydro producers that are local, surprisingly. Yeah, I mean it's that they're good. You don't know until you ask. I mean, there's a few sites that we've helped people, and like the power company had an idea what Bitcoin was, but they didn't understand some of the opportunity that they had with being able to sell 24/7, 365 power, and that we'd agree to curtail whenever they need it. And so sometimes you find things that are not even vectors that you weren't even tracking, meaning like you talk to the power company, they may say, hey, well, we have a lot of power ran to this particular site with this company, and they probably use 20% of the power, cumulatively, and essentially they're peaking for maybe a few hours to run a process, and then it's coming back down, and the whole time they're not using any of that extra power. A lot of fabrication services, tool shops, any kind of heavy industry processes sometimes require a very upper bound high where they might need like 30 megawatts to their facility, but they will cumulatively use that no more than a couple hours a day. And then they spin back down and they're just essentially idle when it comes to the high voltage stuff. And there are targeted opportunities. I think this is an untapped market of finding facilities that will agree to go in either maybe part or partial with you on a, putting a Bitcoin mine on site and just starting with like a 20-foot container and using some of that available power that they already have some kind of contract with, and seeing if you can get some kind of power share agreement with them. There's a lot of this kind of activity that can be done. And I've seen actively happen between like market participants, something like that's been, debanked or have had issues, stuff like, marijuana grow plant, facilities that use a ton of power, but may agree to work some deal out for the heat from a Bitcoin mine, that kind of thing, that you could have kind of a shared revenue track on supporting the Bitcoin network, getting paid in Bitcoin, doing a whole standpoint, and then just having a facility that already has power to supply for it. So there's a ton of opportunity there. So from like when businesses are talking to each other, or if you own a business and you're watching this stream and, just talking to your IT guy or your engineer and figuring out how much power you have on like continuous availability, that kind of sets the tone of if, you just set up a 400 amp panel. I can't tell you how many like 1 hour consultations I've had to where it's literally just been I had a freezer business, a company that was literally just a freezer. They were taking a warehouse for cold goods, and it was like a staging area for multiple small companies that stored stuff. Well, the building they had purchased had way more power than they needed. Essentially at 3 megawatts on site, they were averagely using around 900 kW. So they're like, hey, can we set up like a 1 meg setup here? And we ended up putting a 40-foot container there, and essentially was just using that power on site. Now they were at 9 cents per kW, but because of the continuous load change, they were able to get them into a better rate structure. And actually, because the freezers are on 24/7, also using energy, we ended up getting that price down to them to about 62 cents. So it was an adjustment just by talking to the power company saying, hey, what if we continuously load this 3 meg? Is there a better power structure we can get into? And it actually brought the price down for their freezer goods too. So because they were paying all in, and it kept their demand at the same. So these are types of opportunities where, they looked into that and put a, 40-foot container together, and it's right there on site next to their freezers. Now they didn't need the heat, right? But it was outside, it was blowing, it was in an industrial area. One of the questions from DJ Mines, what made BBT own rather than become a hosting company? Just curious, pros, cons. I mean, when you own or you work with a joint venture where you partially own the equipment, it's a way leaner from a customer engagement standpoint. Like you own it, you own the baseline on it, you make the decisions on your equipment. you make decisions on whenever you can swap out equipment, all those kind of things. If you want to try different firmwares, all that, way leaner operation. If you, from a hosting from us, like we've helped other clients host their hardware that host their facilities that we helped build, and then we paired them up with somebody that wanted to have hosted. So tangentially, we've supported the hosting world. But from us personally, it's just like there's another level of effort when it comes to hosting. And if you're a hosting person, you understand that. If you have an amount of clients, so if you have 10 clients, 20 clients, you're dealing with way more individual attention. And then how do you prioritize one over the other? It's a queue-based ticket system. And if you get inundated with too many customers and you don't have the infrastructure to support that, it's kind of a volume-weighted average thing where you can't have 25 people for 200 clients because the margins are so thin on Bitcoin, and it's such a variable thing that I haven't found an effective model to support thousands of clients or hundreds of clients because the margins are so thin on Bitcoin. Unlike like a traditional business, like if I was building a cloud business or an AI business, the margins are much higher for what the hardware is doing. And you can create that support infrastructure to support it, where this isn't where I can go control pricing. Like as a normal business, I can go out there and say, hey, this product costs more because it costs me more to do it. With Bitcoin and mining and hosting, the traditional models don't apply because Bitcoin's price is the Bitcoin's price. Bitcoin's difficulty is participation on the network. So all those things converge in a down market, then you quickly run out of margin and end up having still the same amount of client count. So it's for the folks that are handling the hosting, you're doing thankless work for people. But that's primary why. You preheat the machines in this weather condition. So yes, if you guys saw the post a few days ago, or it might have been 2 days ago, might have been yesterday actually. I made a post and we had one of our torpedo heaters kind of blowing into the container. It was roughly 20 degrees out, Fahrenheit, about -5 Celsius. And if they're too cold, if there is like the machine itself sitting there at below 0 Celsius, if it's low 20s, teens, usually I try to just get them going with some level of heat. Once they're running and everything's operating, it should be fine. But we have had instances where machines will just stop mining because it just get too cold. There is a lower bound on that. Anybody that's doing mining in very cold climates know this. So you do have to pay attention to just really how cold it is. Do you guys have any more questions here today? Automax says Beat says you're friggin' late. It's all good, my dude. I hope you guys like these live streams. I'm trying to be consistent every Friday at noon to give you guys these live streams on the various topics. Again, next week's going to be very open-ended. I'm going to expect a lot of questions. Hopefully have a whole bunch of pre-done questions for people that I can get answered for you guys. But, make sure you guys share. And if you're working with this content in some way or supporting the networks and stuff, give shout outs for us to get some more exposure to this. We're trying to get more questions, more people interacting in this space. Proof of work is growing. It's not declining. And obviously, we all know Bitcoin's price being over 100, and if it rips real quick up to 200K, it's just everything under the sun's going to be plugged in. It's just a math problem at the end of the day, and what's available hardware out there, and then how much is being produced. Obviously, there's some issues going on right now with Bitmain and getting things through customs. I know that there's several clients, prior clients and folks that I know that have had their stuff locked up in customs right now, trying to get through that stuff. So, it's going to be an interesting next few months and seeing how all that stuff kind of either unravels or or fixes itself on getting some client hardware, but it's definitely impacting some people. As a home miner, the best time of the year is the winter. That's for sure, my dude. Make some sats while you're heating your house. It's the fantastic way to do it. What's the cost for a container all-in price? Ask Big Dogs Crypto. So it depends what containers you get. So we literally had just had a client pick up a container through Kaboomerax. Again, this is not sponsored content. I'm just giving a shout out to somebody we worked with. So Kaboomerax had an N5 V2. They're around $38K. So $38,000 for the container. That's for a Bitmain N5 V2. That's about the going rate. You can find some older containers for around the 20 range, mid 20 range. But you got to make sure on the breakers when you're in and you're sourcing hardware, you got to know what your 3-phase high load factor secondary is going to be off the transformer. You got to make sure it's compatible with with what your container is going to do, or if that container can be retrofitted and upgraded to support whatever that layout is. Most containers, at least in the last 4 years, were built around the concept of 415 240. So 415 on the secondary high voltage side, or they would call it medium voltage side, to your step down at 240. The most power companies, at least we've dealt with, do not directly deal with 415. You'll get 480 and you'll have to have switch gear and then another transformer that you're providing the cost for the switch gear and the transformer for. We have built most of our sites around here directly off the 480. It's way cheaper. So, you got 38 for a container. You probably got another $2 to $3 grand on getting it placed somewhere. So when a container shows up to be delivered to a site, you're going to need a crane. Cranes can be anywhere from $400 to $800 an hour. And then they got transport. So I think our last crane cost us about $1,200 to get one. We got 2 containers placed. It cost us roughly about $1,200 to have 2 containers laid down. If you're trying to put up pillars or some kind of support for the container, just not to sit on the ground, you probably got another $1,200 to $1,500 for that. And then if you are doing a gravel lot, let's say a 60 by 80 kind of lot where you're going to put a couple containers on there, gravel, civil work for the transformer pad, which is usually a 10 by 10 if it's like a 1500 kVA. If you're buying the transformer, it's probably going to cost you 40 to 60 grand for the transformer. Holler at your boy if you need transformers. We have some connections with Giga and Maddox and a few others. BitsBeTrippin.io, shameless plug again, my dudes. We can get you guys lined up with people. If you have to buy that transformer, there's anywhere 6 to 10 week lead times on those. But the transformer is probably going to cost you that 40 to 60,000. Sieve work, all the underground galvanized pipe, EMT type of electrical piping that's going to go in the ground. Your power box, it's going to kind of cover up the parallels that go into the container. Your copper wire, 500 MCM, typically on a 20-foot container, on 1200 amp breaker. All of that is, about 120,000 for all the sieve work, fencing, 60 by 80 lot, and then that includes your copper wire. Copper wire is probably $7,500 in that alone, just for the parallels. And then like our work that we would do on a site like that would cost anywhere from 80 to 100 grand, and GC support work for us to help you build something like that. And that's like a couple containers, like a couple 20-foot containers, anywhere from 80 to 100 grand, somewhere around there, to get the whole project done and set up to where you can get it loaded. And then you got about 14 grand in networking and fiber between the things, Starlink satellite. We use all Ubiquity equipment, cameras, all that's included in that 14, and installed buried fiber, all that kind of stuff. So, all in, without machines, probably $250,000 to $300,000, and then you start putting in machines, you're probably $750,000 all in for a decently priced set of equipment, like if you're doing like 120K Pros or XPs, if you're wanting to step up and go into something bigger, like some of the newer higher end Tash rate, I mean, you're probably looking at $1 million just for the equipment, for a couple containers. It's about 207 units per container. So about 414 machines, you want to buy a little over that because you want to have swaps. Usually on a container build like that, I say anywhere from 425 to 450 on the units. So you have extra units on site to quickly swap out if you have an issue. You might have some DOAs, you might have some other reasons. Granted, they're under warranty, but anybody that's dealt with any of these companies, it's not fast. So if you have an available spot open, it's really nice if you overbuy and you have an extra machine just to throw in there, and you can work the other ticket to get the other ones fixed. So it does make sense. You will have machines that are set on a shelf. It's just the way it is. It's called attrition. So it's hard to kind of devoid your mind that not everything is plugged in at the exact same time. But the reality is you only have so much power that you can deal with, and you want to have quick and immediate replacement parts. So you overbuy on the machines. So yeah, 1.3 milli for like latest gen twin container setup is about where you're expecting. And that's if you can find a leased land. That's not you buying the land. If you're buying the land, add probably about another $100,000 or so, depending where you're at property wise. A lot of that 120 for like the civ work and all that stuff is the permitting. It's the the hours for the GC, the actual general contractor doing the civ work, and then our 80 to 100 is all of the support that we provide on going to council meetings, going to all the things, and just project managing the build essentially. And again, that's on like a 1.5 meg setup as an example. 5 meg setup, a little more. You'll probably be in the upper bound of $1 million for the build, versus it's not a linear equation going up, like where it's 1.5 to 5 is not going to be the 2.5 times more cost. It's probably going to cost about 60% more, but not 100% more or higher. And that's really just because the containers on like a 40-foot container can be anywhere from as low as $90,000 to about 150. And then you got a little more crane cost, a lot more wire cost. I mean, 5 meg is going to cost 115, 120,000. Depending on how far you are from your transformers, it can go anywhere from 60 to 90,000 just for the wire cost, like literally just the copper in the ground. And that's if you're doing like 750 MCM. 750 MCM is heavy duty copper. That's if it's going into like a 2,000 amp primary panel. If you're going into like our Wadham containers we have on one of the sites, there's 3 800 amp power panel boxes, essentially 3 separate towers per 40-foot container. That was using 500 MCM copper to bring it in, and then you had to use NSIs to switch it down to 300 MCM to go into the breakers. So there's just some other slided costs there, and you have to have step-down transformers put in each one. But all in there, yeah, you're probably in that upper, without machines, probably 1.3 to 1.5 million range, all in for a build like that. Again, that's assuming that you can find the property and all that kind of stuff too. What else you guys got? Is the customs issue in U.S. or China? It's in the U.S. So stuff's setting in U.S. right now. People have thousands of miners setting at customs right now. And it has something to do with some control boards and Huawei, but I don't know what all the details are on it yet. There's some municipalities that, for example, a beacon down in Boston is down to 408. Pockets that deal with wonky power, 408. I haven't heard of 408. I've heard of 208, but 408 is interesting. Yeah. We got a bunch of... Yeah, I need a 1000 kVA 415 transformer for an amp box. We got a bunch of 500 kVA transformers that we use for the M3 mini pods from you guys. Nice, my dude, Elliot. Yeah, we had a whole bunch of 500 kVAs. Elliot, is that you that got those? We had 12 of the 500 kVA transformers. 1000 kVA 415. you can always reach out to us, Elliot. Just go to our site and just send in a request, and we can see if we can find one for you. So Giga can build the order, and Maddox does too. Yeah, some places do have some strange setups. I mean, I know that there's been some, in China and stuff is like 380V and 220. It's just a setup. It's like 380, 220 is their setup. And some of the containers are a little wonky. We had some come in where they're I think they're the NLTs. They're the fan controllers were wired very weird and had to be rewired. Like essentially there's a whole bunch of nuance I haven't went into, and I mean this live stream is pretty much coming to an end, but like some of the nuance maybe on a future stream if you guys would like is like when you get the containers, especially if they're not like a major brand container, it's like just somebody that built one. You gotta walk it with your electrician and look at the one lines of the way things are configured, because you might have things that were wired. Like we had some containers come in with their PDUs set up to where they were line to line, not line to neutral. So then you were just going to get 480. Like on our setup, you would just get 480 to the plug, which is not what you want to do. So you got to do like a one line walk, and one line is just how things are connected. Like what's the stenciled out engineering drawing with what the containers are. If you're about to buy a container, ask for that information and just sit down with an electrician, spend $120, have them look over it and make sure that it's wired appropriately for what you're trying to do. Again, I'm going to shameless plug one more time, BitsBeTrippin.io. We have consulting things. Sometimes I can answer those questions in a 1 hour session. Like you guys can send us the thing. We can take a look at it, let our electricians look at it really quick and get you a quick answer back. Saves you a ton of time. It's not a huge expense for you, and get some critical things answered and fast. Those type of situations where if you have a unique setup, like reach out to us. That's what we're here for. .408.
The 408 is a line to neutral on some of the transformers in the U.S. It's based off of three-phase power off of 480. So line to line would be 480. Line to neutral would be 408.
On the three-phase side.
On the three-phase side, yep. So
there you go. You heard it from Todd. He's in the background here. So Todd's giving us some of that electric knowledge here. So yeah, I don't think it's too out of whack. It's just what the way they have it configured.
Yeah, well, it would be a configuration that would not be acceptable for mining unless you have three.
Yeah, you would have to step it down.
You would have to step it down again.
Yeah. So yeah, you wouldn't want to do that. Elliot said, yeah, BB Todd delivered them. It was super neat to see them get loaded into the truck from 2 videos after we received them. So Elliot's talking on here from where he got our 500 kVA transformers, the ones that you delivered. Yeah. Yeah, we have to be careful in what we purchase for equipment, especially stoves. Yeah, it's and it's easy to mess it up, my dudes. It's so easy to mess it up. Like you really got to have. Usually when we're out there, like Todd and I or any of the other engineers or folks that come in, will have a discussion and kind of walk it. And I know we've pointed out things with people that have been an issue that that they're the experts on, but we were like, hey, what do you think about this? Because this is the way this looks. And they're like, oh my God, that's totally the way it is. So it's good to have redundancy in like any of these processes. Don't just rely on anybody. Ask questions all the time. And you'll get your, it just be a team, work with a team. We probably have 3-4 calls a week sometimes, just from 1 hour calls from people, and it's just we help them just get going or get started, and sometimes that results into a larger retainer, and then we'll sometimes just pair them with other people too that are in a particular area that we have some arrangements with. So that's where I say this is a community. Bitcoin space is a community. We're all working together for the same network, and have that mindset going into any of this. Like you don't need to be alone in it. Reach out when you need certain answers met. I mean, sometimes you just ask a question on one of these videos, like in the comments or on Twitter, and sometimes we'll just answer it. If it's a quick question, just ask it. Like, you're never going to hurt. You might have somebody else in the community answer it for you too. But like, there is so much nuance when it comes to the power and the connection systems. And then you got to go through inspections. You got to be able to explain this to an inspector of what's going on. There's a lot of grounding requirements on certain situations, like on the substations. You got to be tied to the ground grid. There's a lot of extra cost in that if you're not attributing it, you know, and then you get told when they come in and say, hey, this needs to be, you know, bonded and grounded to the, you know, ground grid that's 48 inches below the ground. You got to dig all that up to get access to it. We've had a lot of various situations where we've added awnings to control some of the wind flow, and because we added a metal awning to the container, we had to like rebond that also. They came in and said, hey, you need to do this. So a lot of lessons learned on all the nuance on that, especially on the power side. And you're dealing with high voltage, so you got to be very safe and careful. Have your essentially your SOPs, you know, have inspections, have your right PPE. I mean, when you start going from that single phase kind of home, garage, barn builds to like proper 3-phase stuff, like you gotta respect it, because arc flash, all those kind of risk, you're dealing on a whole other level. And you know, just got to be safe with it, my dudes out there. So I think we're gonna wrap this one up. Hopefully this has been a good one for you guys. I think in total, we've had quite a few good questions. Again, next week's is going to be just a really open question and answer session. So come with your questions and answers, or come with your questions, and maybe somebody's going to answer to you. But I'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace, my dudes.